After 60, something begins to change, but almost no one notices it immediately. It's not a noise, it's not a visible sign, and much less something the world teaches you to see. On the contrary, society usually says that this phase is one of loss, of weariness, of the end of the road. But what if that weren't true? What if precisely when the world begins to distance itself, something much greater begins to approach the soul? Many people feel a strange fear as they grow older. Fear of no longer being useful, fear of being forgotten, fear that time is running out. This fear doesn't arise from nowhere. It's born because no one can explain what truly happens within the soul when life slows down. And that's where the mystery lies, when the noise of achievements diminishes, when there's no longer a need to prove anything to anyone, something silent begins to work inside the person. It is at this point that spiritual teachings reveal a truth that causes curiosity and even a certain shiver. After 60, God doesn't distance himself. He draws near, not to demand but to work, not to punish but to prepare. What was previously hidden by haste, pride, or the rush of daily life begins to surface. Thoughts change, memories return, profound questions arise, such as what really matters, or what remains unresolved within me. This scares some people, because looking inward isn't always comfortable, but it also sparks curiosity, because there's something liberating about this process. It's not the end of life, it's a change of phase, an invisible yet powerful transition. And understanding this can completely transform how you see time, age, and even the meaning of existence. Stay until the end, because the truth behind what happens to the soul after 60 is very different from what you've been told, and it may change the way you see your own path. After the age of 60, silence begins to take on a different meaning. It's no longer just the absence of noise. It's as if, little by little, life shuts off the sound of the world so that something much more important can be heard from within. Many people find this strange. The house becomes quieter, the days seem slower, and the mind begins to wander through thoughts that were previously pushed away by the rush of daily life. And that's exactly where the most powerful aspect of this moment lies. Father Pio taught that silence is never empty. For him, silence is a door. When a person stops chasing after everything, God finally finds space to act. Before 60, the soul lives surrounded by tasks, demands, trials, and expectations. Afterward, this noise diminishes. And what remains? The truth. What was hidden begins to appear more clearly. Feelings, memories, regrets, gratitude, and even profound questions that never had time to arise. Scholars of aging explain that this phase of life increases the capacity for reflection and inner awareness. It's not weakness, it's maturity. Silence helps a person see themselves without masks. That's why it sometimes bothers people. But this discomfort is not a punishment, it's an invitation. Padre Pio said that God speaks softly because it is the world that shouts, and only those who learn to be silent can hear. In this silence, the soul begins to be carefully worked on. God doesn't rush in. He reorganizes, cleanses, calms. Things that once seemed enormous lose their power. Others, which seemed small, gain value. The person begins to understand that not everything needed all. That struggle, that much pain could have been surrendered sooner, and this generates a mixture of fear and relief. Fear, because looking inward requires courage. Relief, because finally there is peace. The silence of the mature soul is not abandonment, it is preparation. And whoever understands this discovers that this phase of life is not empty. It is profoundly full of meaning. After the age of 60, something curious begins to happen within a person. Many things that once seemed indispensable begin to lose their power. It's not that the person stops enjoying life, it's that they begin to see life with different eyes. That rush to conquer, prove, win, or impress no longer makes as much sense. And that's frightening, because for a long time, identity was tied to what one did, what one had, what others saw. When that begins to loosen, a silent question arises. Who am I without all of this? Spiritual teachings explain that this moment is not a loss, it is liberation. Padre Pio, he taught that God works on detachment with care, never with violence. He doesn't force anything away, he loosens things gradually. Little by little, the soul realizes it can let go of what has already served its purpose. Vanities, old disputes, harbored resentments, the need for control. All of this begins to weigh more than it helps. Scholars of human behavior explain that, at this stage of life, the brain begins to seek meaning more than reward. The person starts to understand that not everything needed to have been so hard fought. That many battles were unnecessary, and this realization hurts a little because it brings regrets. But at the same time, it brings relief. It's like taking a heavy backpack off your back after a long hike. This detachment doesn't mean giving up on life. It means living lighter. A mature soul learns that holding on too tightly hurts, while letting go heals. God uses this time to teach that a person's worth has never been in the things they have accumulated, but in the love they have offered and the good they have spread. Therefore, after 60, detachment is not a punishment. It's a silent gift, a preparation for a more authentic life where the heart is free for what truly matters. And those who understand this realize that losing some things was exactly what saved their soul. After the age of 60, many people begin to notice something different within themselves. Their awareness becomes clearer. It's not that the person suddenly knows everything, but they begin to see more truthfully. Things that were once easily justified now cause discomfort. Words spoken in the past resurface. Attitudes that seem normal begin to weigh on the heart. And this can cause fear, because nobody likes to face their own mistakes. But this process has a much greater purpose. Spiritual teachings show that this clarity does not arise to accuse, but rather to heal. Padre Pio, he taught that God illuminates the conscience when the soul has reached the maturity to understand without running away. In youth, the mind races, defends itself, justifies itself. After 60, the heart becomes more sensitive to the truth. And this is not weakness, it is inner growth. Experts in human behavior explain that as the years go by, impulsivity decreases and empathy increases. A person begins to put themselves more in another's shoes. They better understand the consequences of their choices. Therefore, their conscience becomes more discerning, but also more just. It's no longer about winning arguments, but about having peace. At this moment, God works on the soul, showing what needs to be corrected, forgiven, or repaired. Small lies lose their meaning. Old prides begin to crumble. The person feels the urge to apologize, to make peace, to close unresolved cycles. This is frightening because it stirs up the past. But it also brings profound relief because the truth sets free. After 60, a clear conscience is not a burden. It's a beacon. It guides the soul to a more honest, simpler, and lighter life. Those who understand this process discover that God doesn't expose to humiliate. He reveals to liberate. After the age of 60, something unexpected begins to happen. Old memories return without warning. Good moments, but also pains that seemed forgotten. Sometimes it's a hurtful word, a wrong decision, a loss never properly mourned. This can be frightening. The person thinks, why am I remembering this now? But this return is not by chance. It's a sign that the soul is ready for something very important, the care. Spiritual teachings explain that God doesn't interfere with open wounds when a person is still rushing too far. He waits for the right time. Padre Pio, he taught that when the soul matures, God begins to revisit what was left unresolved, not to wound again, but to close the gaps once and for all. After 60, the heart no longer needs to pretend that everything is all right. It can be sincere. Experts on aging explain that at this stage of life, the brain revisits deep emotional memories. It's as if the mind is tidying up. What was left aside comes back to be organized, and that hurts a little, but it also brings relief, because an ignored wound weighs more than a cared-for wound. At this moment, God works on forgiveness. Not only forgiveness towards others, but forgiveness towards oneself. The person begins to understand that they did what they could with what they knew at that time, that not everything was evil. That much of it was fear, immaturity, or lack of guidance. This understanding does not erase the past, but it changes the way one looks at it. Healing old wounds doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. It means freeing the heart from the weight it has carried for years. After 60, this inner work becomes possible because the soul no longer needs to prove anything. It only needs peace. And when this healing begins, something beautiful happens. The heart becomes lighter, the gaze more serene, and life takes on a new flavor. It's not about returning to the past, it's about finally being free from it. After the age of 60, suffering begins to be felt in a different way. The pain still exists in the body, in losses, in limitations, but something changes inside. What once seemed merely unfair begins to take on a new meaning. Many people ask themselves, why is this happening to me now? And this question, although painful, opens an important door within the soul. Spiritual teachings explain that God does not remove all suffering at this stage of life, but it changes the way it is experienced. Padre Pio, he experienced great physical and spiritual pain and taught that suffering, when embraced consciously, can profoundly transform the soul. It's not about liking pain, it's about understanding that it can teach something that comfort never could. Experts in the psychology of faith and aging confirm that older people tend to cope better with loss when they can find meaning in it. Pain ceases to be merely a punishment and becomes a path to inner growth. After 60, the soul no longer struggles so much against reality. It begins to ask, what can I learn from this? At this moment, God works on the heart with delicacy. Suffering begins to cleanse what is unnecessary. Pride falls away. Haste disappears. Small things gain value. The person learns to ask for help, to accept limitations, and to trust more. This is frightening because no one likes to feel fragile, but it also brings the soul closer to something very powerful: humility. Padre Pio taught that no pain offered with love is lost. Even when one doesn't understand everything, God acts. After 60, suffering ceases to be merely a burden and becomes a silent teacher. It teaches patience, compassion, and surrender, and those who understand this discover something surprising. Pain did not destroy the soul. On the contrary, it helped to shape it. After age 60, many people begin to realize that their perspective changes. It's not just the body that feels the passage of time. It's as if the heart begins to look further afield. What once occupied all thoughts, money, status, arguments, haste, begins to lose ground. And in its place, bigger, deeper questions arise. Questions that are frightening, but also awaken curiosity. What comes next? What was the true meaning of my life? Where is all this leading? Spiritual teachings explain that this change does not happen by chance. Padre Pio, he taught that in maturity, God begins to guide the soul towards something that transcends time, not in a frightening way, but serenely. The idea of eternity ceases to be a distant fear and becomes a reality that brings reflection. The person no longer lives only for the present. They begin to live with an awareness of what remains. Scholars of spirituality and aging explain that at this stage of life, human beings naturally seek lasting meaning. Therefore, the soul becomes more sensitive to what is eternal. Love, forgiveness, peace, faith. Fleeting things lose their power. True things gain value, and this transforms the way we live each day. This inner movement may cause some fear at first. Thinking about eternity makes a person reconsider choices, attitudes, and priorities. But little by little, this fear transforms into tranquility because the soul understands that it is not being pushed towards the end, but rather being guided towards a greater understanding of life. After the age of 60, God works on the soul so that it doesn't arrive in the future carrying unnecessary burdens. He teaches it to let go, trust, and rest. Eternity ceases to be a threatening mystery and becomes a promise of continuity. And those who allow this work to happen discover something profound. Living with one's gaze fixed on eternity doesn't take away the joy of life. It gives it a much truer meaning. After the age of 60, prayer begins to change. Many people notice this without being able to explain it properly. Before, praying was about asking for health, work, solutions to problems. Now, prayer becomes quieter, simpler, and much deeper. Sometimes there are no words, just a feeling of presence. And this can seem strange. The person thinks, "Am I praying correctly?" But in fact, something very beautiful is happening. Spiritual teachings show that this change is a sign of the soul's maturity. Padre Pio, he taught that true prayer doesn't depend on many phrases, but on an open heart. After 60, God begins to work on prayer as trust. It's no longer about talking non-stop. It's about learning to stay, to be silent, to be present, to be surrendered. Spirituality experts explain that over time, the mind slows down and the heart gains more space. The person no longer prays to convince God of something. They pray to rest in Him, and this transforms everything. Anxiety decreases. Fear loses its power. The soul learns that it doesn't need to control every detail of life. This type of prayer frightens those accustomed to noise. The silence seems empty at first, but soon you realize it is full of peace, of listening, and of truth. Padre Pio said that God speaks more when a person stops talking so much. And after 60, this listening becomes possible. Mature prayer doesn't demand perfection, it demands sincerity. Sometimes it's just a sigh, other times a simple thank you. In many moments, it's simply being there, knowing you're not alone. God works on the soul in that silence, strengthening from within what the body can no longer do as before. And those who experience this change discover something surprising. Prayer ceases to be an obligation and becomes rest. A profound rest where the soul learns to truly trust. After 60, life begins to slow down. The days seem to pass differently, the rush decreases, the demands become less, and the heart begins to realize something important. There's no longer a need to rush so much. At first, this can cause a strange emptiness. The person wonders, what do I do now? But this moment is not a loss of meaning. It's the beginning of a new kind of learning. Spiritual teachings show that when life stops rushing by, it begins to teach. Padre Pio, he believed that a mature soul teaches more by example than by words. After 60, a person doesn't need to say much to impact others. The way they treat others, listen to them, forgive them, and act becomes a living lesson. Life cycle psychology experts explain that this phase awakens the desire to leave a legacy. Not a legacy of things, but of values. The person begins to worry less about what they will gain and more about what they will leave in the hearts of others. A simple piece of advice, a story told with affection, a gesture of patience, all of this begins to have enormous weight. During this period, God works on the soul so that it becomes a beacon of calm in a turbulent world. This person's presence conveys security. Their silence teaches more than long speeches. Their patience shows that there is another possible rhythm to life, and this deeply touches children, grandchildren, and everyone around them. Sometimes people don't even realize the impact they're having. They think they're standing still, but in reality, they're teaching what truly matters. Life slows down on the outside, but gains depth on the inside. After 60, God transforms experience into living wisdom, and those who understand this discover that they don't need to do great things to teach, they just need to live. Truthfully, after the age of 60, many people believe that life is coming to an end. The body no longer responds as before, the pace slows down, and the world seems to notice less. But this is one of the biggest misconceptions that exist. According to spiritual teachings, this is not the phase in which God finishes the work. It is the phase in which he refines it. Like a craftsman who attends to the final details, God works with more calm, more depth, and more love. Padre Pio, he taught that the most important part of life is not the noisiest, it's the quietest. After 60, everything that has been lived becomes raw material. Joys, mistakes, losses, successes. Nothing is thrown away. God uses every piece of history to mold a more whole, simpler and truer soul. At this stage, a person begins to understand that they no longer need to prove anything. They don't need to chase after recognition. They don't need to beat anyone. The heart begins to rest, and this rest is not giving up. It's maturity. It's when the soul learns that the value of life is not in the quantity of achievements, but in the quality of love experienced. Spirituality experts explain that this stage is one of the most sacred because the human being approaches the truth of who they really are. The masks fall, the rush disappears, the essential remains. God works so that the soul arrives light, at peace, without unnecessary burdens. Therefore, after 60, life doesn't lose its meaning. It gains clarity. What once confused now becomes organized. What once hurt now teaches. What once seemed urgent now seems insignificant. Those who understand this process discover something profound. Aging is not disappearing, it is becoming whole. And when God finishes this silent work, the soul is not weak, it is ready. If everything you've heard so far has resonated with you, don't let this message stay with you alone. Write in the comments, what touched your soul the most, or what part of your life did you feel God is working on right now? Your comment might be exactly the sign someone else needed to read today. If this message brought you peace, reflection, or hope, please leave a like. This helps the video reach more people who are going through the same quiet moment in their lives. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to continue receiving profound messages based on spiritual teachings that help you understand time, the soul, and the purpose of each phase of life. Remember, after 60, it's not the end of the road. It's the time when God works with more care. Share this video with someone you love. Sometimes a simple gesture can transform a heart.
Hear the true prophetic message.